Good Shabbos. Now, generally, when I am assigned the sermon right before or after the new year, I take the opportunity to participate in the age-old temple tradition of the prediction sermon. There are two reasons, however, why I will not be doing that this evening. The first is that last week, Rabbi Hornston and her son Benji, who came up on the bima to assist her with her predictions, together gave what may have been the most epic prediction sermon of all time. Please go back and watch it if you were unfortunate enough to miss it. The predictions were excellent, but Benji was amazing, leading me to turn to my wife and say, I may never give another prediction sermon again unless Benji Stern is up there with me. The other reason is that I did give the prediction sermon last year, and just recently, our executive director, Jason, had the brilliant idea to post that sermon online so that everyone could see just how many predictions I got wrong. So this year, instead of predicting the future, I have decided to play it safe and predict the past. As they say, hindsight is 20/20, or in this case, 2024. As it turns out, the Torah is brilliant about making predictions in hindsight. For instance, in Deuteronomy 34:5, it states, "So Moses, God's servant, died there." But wait a minute. According to tradition, it was Moses who wrote down the Torah. How could he have written about his own death? The Torah, it seems, is looking backward from the future, sort of like me making predictions for 2024 in 2025. I bring all of this to you this evening because our portion, Vayigash, contains what I believe to be one of the most fascinating instances of a backward-looking prediction in the Torah. But it is subtle, so you might have missed it. Remember where we left off last week. The sons of Joseph are standing trembling with fear before the imposing figure of the vice pharaoh of all Egypt, falsely accused of a crime. They have just been informed that their youngest brother Benjamin will have to be kept as a hostage to ensure their return. This is when Judah bravely steps forward and offers to sacrifice himself to secure Benjamin's freedom. And it is this act of courage on the part of Judah that softens Joseph's heart, and he sends his courtiers away and reveals himself tearfully to his brothers, forgives them for selling him into Egyptian slavery, and bids them to come live with him on the river Nile. Make no mistake, it is Judah who is the hero of this story. So, why is this a prediction from the future? Well, remember that each of the brothers represents one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And as you know, 10 of those tribes were eventually lost. The only two remaining tribes, the tribes which ended up comprising the Jewish people, are Benjamin and Judah, with Judah being by far the more dominant. That is why it is called Judaism. We are actually all descendants of the tribe of Judah. And as you know, it is always the victors who get to write the history. So in a Judaic text, who would get to be the hero but Judah himself? This is a bit arcane, I know, for those of us who are not biblical history buffs. But I do believe there is a practical application and one we can bring to bear in this new year. As I was researching this sermon, it occurred to me that this is exactly the advice I give to all my wedding couples. I suggest that they rediscuss all of the issues that often cause tzuris in young marriages: money, kids, career, taking one another for granted, religion, and yes, difficult parents, and you know who you are. Now, those are topics that they have already discussed ad nauseum, but not as 45 or 50-year-olds looking back on their own lives from the future. When Wendy and I got married, for instance, we had a huge argument in the planning about soup. Should we serve hot soup or cold soup at the reception? 15 years later, I could not remember which soup I wanted or which soup we had. But I do remember the moment she slipped this ring on my finger, and we both felt Ruach Elohim, the wind of God from the book of Genesis, flowing through the open windows of our chuppah and uniting our souls together. So, from the perspective of 15 years in the future, soup just doesn't seem that important. Certainly not worth fighting about. But few of us here are about to be married. So what about us? I am 67 years old. In 15 years, I will be 82. And yes, I do use that marker as a looking back point to make most of my important decisions, financial, professional, relational. I ask myself, how will this decision play out for me and my family when I am in my 80s? I must say, in this regard, I am very lucky. I have an older brother, if you will, Rabbi Harold Loss, who is just about 15 years ahead of me, and thus I get to watch my future from the present. One small example. As many of you know, I practice yoga regularly. Why? After decades of practicing and stretching and suffering, I still cannot touch my toes. But as I look around, I see that the 75 and 80-year-olds in my classes can sit cross-legged on the floor and then rise up to standing without using their hands. And I would prefer to be them rather than those of you, and I won't mention any names here, who groan every time we ask you to rise for the Baruch Hu. But it is not just personal decision-making that should be undertaken in this manner. Think what a better world this would be if we utilize this same skill in our society, in our politics. How less polluted our world would be, how much stronger our infrastructure, how many resources we would be pouring into renewable energy, scientific research, public transportation, and, of course, education. The nation of Costa Rica, in 1948, looked back from the future and made a remarkable decision. They disbanded their military and poured every single penny saved into education and healthcare. As a result, Costa Rica now has the healthiest, most highly educated population in the region, and its GDP rose precipitously as well. Now that is legislating from the future. I recently heard a really interesting panel of futurists. When asked what technological innovation of the present will most greatly affect the future, most of them pointed to AI, artificial intelligence. The most fascinating answer, however, came from a gentleman who opined that the singular invention which will change society the most will be Ozempic. Ozempic and that class of drugs. Why? Because, he insisted, Ozempic works through impulse control. And what is the cause of so many of society's ills? Lack of impulse control. Not only in our diets, but with regard to drug abuse, drinking, gambling, consumerism, violence, road rage, and so on. If we as a society, he concluded, were to find a way to curb those impulses, what a wonderful world it would be. Which is really just another way of saying what the Pirkei Avot has been teaching us for centuries. Ben Zoma asks, who is mighty? And the answer is, he who controls his own anger. Who is rich? She who is satisfied with her lot, with what she has. In other words, who will have a better 2025? Those of us who find healthy ways to curb our lesser impulses. Unless, of course, those impulses happen to be giving tzedakah, performing mitzvot, and attending services at Temple Israel every Friday night. If we give in to those impulses and curb those more destructive ones, I do believe that we will look back on 2025 from the future and remember it as a very good year. Shabbat Shalom and a happy new year to us all.